They say betrayal is a kind of poison. It creeps slowly through the veins of trust and turns love to ashes. When Elsa Greenwood discovered her husband Andrew's affair, her world teetered on the edge of ruin. As if the betrayal wasn't enough, Andrew did the unthinkable. He let his mistress choose their unborn child's name. That single decision fanned the flames of Elsa's despair into scorching fury. On the brink of labor, this pregnant wife altered her will, setting off a chain of shocking twists. This is a story of shattered vows, hidden motives, and the desperate fight for control. No matter the cost, Elsa Greenwood could still remember the day she said, "I do" to Andrew Greenwood beneath the old willow tree in her grandmother's backyard. She had worn a lace gown that caught the sunlight like a promise of forever, and Andrew had stood with tears in his eyes, ready to protect her from every storm life might throw their way. Back then, he was a kind man, gentle, always searching for ways to make her life easier. They had whispered promises under that willow, sealing them with a tender kiss. If anyone asked her about her marriage, Elsa would light up like a 1,000-watt bulb. But as the years passed, cracks began to show in their happily ever after. Work demanded more of Andrew's time, especially after he took a senior position at Harwell Pharmaceuticals. He traveled frequently, so often that Elsa could hardly remember the last weekend he spent at home. He insisted it was all for their future to secure a life free of financial worries. She tried to believe him. The first sign that something was wrong came from a simple lipstick stain on Andrew's collar. It was a faint smudge, easily overlooked, but the color was bright pink, nothing Elsa would ever wear. She confronted him about it, and he laughed it off. "A co-worker gave me a hug," he explained with a dismissive wave. "It's nothing, Elle." She wanted to believe him. Love can make a person as trusting as a child, yet the uneasy knot in her stomach refused to disappear. Every time Andrew left for a business trip, Elsa felt a silent dread. Had her husband, her best friend, grown into a stranger? One crisp autumn afternoon, Elsa decided to surprise Andrew with a weekend trip to Lake Tahoe. She wanted to reignite the spark in their marriage, which had been reduced to flickers of routine. As she rummaged through Andrew's desk drawers, searching for his travel wallet, her hands brushed across a folded piece of paper. The words caught her eye. "Reservation for Andrew Greenwood and Clarissa Henderson. Presidential Suite." Her heart pounded. Clarissa Henderson. The name sounded vaguely familiar, perhaps someone from Andrew's office. Yet Elsa had never heard Andrew mention a Clarissa, and certainly not in the context of a romantic getaway. She looked at the date. It was from a month ago, the same time Andrew had claimed to be at a medical conference in San Diego. Elsa's hands trembled. She wanted to tear the paper to bits, but a surge of adrenaline made her methodical. She folded it again, placed it back into the drawer exactly how she found it, and stepped away as if the desk were on fire. Outside, the wind rattled the window frame, a cruel echo of the storm brewing inside her chest. That night, when Andrew came home exhausted from work, Elsa was waiting. She had tried to calm herself, rehearsed 1,000,000 times how she would approach him. "Andrew," she began softly, "can we talk?" Without warning, tears welled up. He walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, the touch she once found so reassuring. "What's going on, Elle?" he asked carefully. She pulled back, looking him square in the face. "Who is Clarissa Henderson?" Her voice shook. She forced herself to keep eye contact, searching for any flicker of honesty or a sign of immediate regret. Andrew's face went pale. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "She's Someone from work, that's all. He tried to summon his usual cool composure, but the tremble in his voice betrayed him. Elsa swallowed. Is she the reason you haven't wanted to touch me for months? The reason you keep traveling? Why I found a hotel reservation for the two of you in a presidential suite? She spat the words out quickly, as if they tasted bitter. He stammered. Look, it's just a mistake. It was a business function and Clarissa managed it. Maybe the reservation was labeled incorrectly. But Elsa sensed the half-lies weaving through his words. She pressed further. Andrew's eyes flicked from side to side as though searching for an escape. Then at last the tension snapped. Fine, he blurted. I don't love her, Elle. You have to believe me. It was an impulse. A fling. It was never supposed to turn into this. Elsa's knees buckled, and she caught herself on the couch. A fling. It felt like her heart was physically tearing in two. Andrew tried to comfort her, but she brushed him off. Get out, she whispered. It was only 2 words, but they carried the force of a collapsing universe. He stood there, shame twisting his features. In the hush of that dreadful moment, Elsa's world broke open in a way she never thought possible. Life has a relentless way of testing a person's breaking point. The very next morning, Elsa woke up to an unusual wave of nausea. She had missed her period, but chalked it up to stress. Deep down, she had always wanted a baby with Andrew, someone to bring fresh hope into their marriage. Yet after the fiasco the night before, her mind was in turmoil. Still, an intuition tugged at her. She had a home pregnancy test in the bathroom cabinet. With trembling hands, she took the test. Minutes later, the small screen displayed a single word. Pregnant. Elsa collapsed onto the cold bathroom tiles, sobbing. Joy and despair slammed into her simultaneously. A pregnancy should be a celebration. But how could she welcome a child when her marriage lay in ruins? She mustered up the courage to call her close friend, Linda Cortez, a woman she had known since kindergarten. Linda listened quietly, then told Elsa to see a doctor immediately. That afternoon, Elsa found herself in Dr. Harriet Liu's office. As Dr. Liu conducted the ultrasound, Elsa watched the fuzzy, delicate shape of a tiny life forming. A heartbeat strong and steady reverberated through her eardrums, almost overshadowing her own frantic pulse. Tears streamed down her face. Her child had done nothing wrong. This was a chance at love, an innocent beginning, but it was overshadowed by Andrew's betrayal. Dr. Liu squeezed Elsa's shoulder gently. Babies can be healing, she offered, in ways you'd never expect. Elsa nodded, not trusting her voice. Once the visit ended, she stepped out into the corridor, tears blurring her vision. She dialed Andrew's number. He deserved to know. As soon as he picked up, she uttered the words that changed everything. I'm pregnant. When Andrew heard the news, shock and excitement flickered across his face. He arrived home that evening, carrying a bouquet of Elsa's favorite flowers, calla lilies. It was a gesture that tugged painfully at her heart. She was still furious, still devastated, but the idea of giving the baby a complete family weighed heavily on her mind. Elsa Andrew said quietly, I am so sorry. You have to believe me when I say I never meant to hurt you. Clarissa was a mistake. Elsa glared at him. A mistake that went on for months. A mistake you meticulously planned hotels for. He looked stricken. I know I've messed up, but please, I want to be a father to our child. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Elsa let out a slow breath, shoulders sagging as though carrying a boulder. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted. "But we have a baby to think about now. I need time." Andrew nodded watery hope in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, he tried to prove he was serious about repairing their marriage. He took Elsa to her prenatal appointments, consulted with Dr. Harriet Liu about safe exercise regimens, even offered to attend therapy. They went to a few sessions together, each one an emotional roller coaster that ended in tears more often than resolution. In quiet moments, Elsa caught glimpses of the man she once loved. The one who made silly faces at dinner, who jumped out from behind doors just to hear her laugh. Sometimes her mind teased her. Maybe we can work this out? She wanted to believe that love could triumph, but doubts lingered. Late one night, she checked Andrew's phone as he slept, a wave of guilt washing over her. There in his messaging app was a text from Clarissa Henderson. "Are you going to tell her you love me?" No responses. But the implication was chilling. Andrew was still in contact with Clarissa. That seed of doubt rooted itself firmly in Elsa's psyche. Even the joy of pregnancy wasn't enough to extinguish the burning sense of betrayal. One morning, Elsa was nearly 6 months pregnant. Her belly a gentle curve that Andrew softly kissed each night. She woke up early, determined to sort out the nursery. Tucked away in an old cardboard box labeled "baby stuff," she found a list of names she had jotted down over the years: Lily Olivia, Samuel Joseph. Each name had meaning, a tiny reflection of the future she had dreamed of. That very evening, Andrew returned from a work dinner face taut. He approached Elsa cautiously. "Elle, we need to talk." Alarm bells rang in her head. "What is it?" He took a moment, meeting her gaze. "I promised Clarissa I'd help her find a new position at Harwell's London branch." The name Clarissa felt like a punch to Elsa's stomach. "Why are you still making promises to your mistress?" The bitterness in her voice came out sharper than broken glass. Andrew frowned. "She threatened to expose everything, potentially even twist the story to harm my career. I had to keep her appeased." Elsa felt her baby kick as though reacting to the tension. She placed a hand over her belly, silently urging calm. "Is that all?" "No," Andrew admitted, voice faltering. We talked about the baby. She asked what names we were considering, and I..." He paused, guilt flickering in his eyes. "She suggested Isabella for a girl, or Leonardo if it's a boy." Elsa's breath caught. Her mind whirled, struggling to process the enormous betrayal. Not only was Clarissa still in the picture, but Andrew had let his mistress weigh in on the baby's name, a name that was supposed to be decided by her and Andrew, alone out of love. The air felt suffocating. Elsa turned away. "Get out, Andrew," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You have no idea how many lines you've crossed." He tried to reach for her hand, but she snatched it away. A storm raged inside her, heartbreak, rage, helplessness. In the corner of the room, the list of baby names she had lovingly prepared lay crumpled and forgotten. The following weeks turned into a test of Elsa's resilience. Her prenatal appointments continued, her belly growing more prominent with each passing day. Yet emotionally, she felt hollowed out. Andrew had moved into the guest bedroom, though the tension between them was as thick as the August heat that seeped through the windows. She confided in Linda, who urged her to consult a lawyer, at least to understand her options if things came to a divorce. Elsa resisted at first. Her heart stubbornly clung to the idea of a unified family. But the night she overheard Andrew taking a call from Clarissa in hushed tones, she broke. The next morning, she visited Redwood & Associates, a reputable law firm recommended by a colleague. Walking through the polished marble foyer, Elsa felt like she was stepping into an alternate universe. Suits rushed about with urgent phone calls, and the air buzzed with quiet tension. In a modest conference room, she met James Redwood himself, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes. She explained her situation in trembling words, feeling vulnerable and ashamed. James listened attentively, occasionally jotting down notes. "I've handled many cases like this," he said gently. "My job is to protect you and your child, no matter what you decide." He outlined the basics: property division, alimony, child support. The mention of a will came up organically. "Have you and Andrew discussed your estate planning?" James asked. "With a child on the way, it's often a good idea to revisit your will." Elsa hesitated. Many years ago, she and Andrew had drafted wills naming each other as beneficiaries, never imagining they might need to exclude one another. Yet now the thought festered. If Andrew was still entangled with Clarissa, could that woman someday benefit from Elsa's own assets, or, God forbid, have an influence over her child's inheritance? She left the law firm with a stack of paperwork, her mind spinning. The baby kicked, as if urging her to do something, to protect them both. Elsa gently rested her hand on her belly and whispered, "I will keep you safe." Despite the rocky marriage, Linda insisted on throwing a baby shower for Elsa. "It'll be good for you," she promised. "A chance to celebrate this baby. You need some joy, Elle." Elsa reluctantly agreed. The baby shower took place at Linda's suburban home, decorated with pastel balloons, pink and blue streamers, and a table overflowing with gifts. Outside, a warm breeze drifted through the trees, bringing the scent of freshly mowed grass. Friends and family arrived, placing thoughtful presents on a long table. Elsa tried her best to smile, tried to absorb the love and positivity swirling around her. Yet she couldn't help noticing Andrew moving from group to group, looking restless. He was never quite at ease these days, especially when the conversation inevitably turned to the baby. At one point, Linda began a party game where each guest suggested a baby name and pinned it to a board. Shouts of Emma, Noah, Sophia, and Ethan filled the room. Elsa felt a pang every time she heard a name. She forced a smile, watching Andrew shift his weight uncomfortably in the corner. Was he thinking of Clarissa's suggestions? As the game wound down, Andrew took the microphone Linda handed him, preparing to make a small speech. Elsa saw the anxious glint in his eyes. "First off, I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate our baby," Andrew began. "Elsa and I are so grateful for all the love and support. We're going through a tough time right now. But this baby is our light." He paused. "We've been discussing names and we've come up with a few ideas." Elsa's heart hammered. They had never come up with anything, unless Andrew meant Clarissa's suggestions. She stared at him silently, praying he would not utter them in front of all their friends. Andrew cleared his throat, glancing at her. "We're not quite sure yet," he corrected. "But we promise you'll all be the first to know when we decide." Relief coursed through Elsa's veins, yet something about his hesitation bothered her. She nodded stiffly as applause broke out. The baby shower concluded on a relatively peaceful note, guests scattering as the sun set. Linda wrapped Elsa in a hug. "You are strong, Elle," she said softly. "You'll get through this. I'm here." Tears gathered in Elsa's eyes. She looked at Andrew loading gifts into the car, a figure who once was her entire world. She whispered back, "I hope so." Shortly after the baby shower, Andrew announced he'd be traveling again, for one last business trip. Elsa bristled, suspecting Clarissa might be involved, but she kept her thoughts to herself. Her focus remained on safeguarding her unborn child, physically and legally. While Andrew was away, Elsa visited Redwood and Associates again. This time, she asked James Redwood more specifically about changing her will. She wanted to name her sister, Maggie Johnson, as the child's guardian in the event of Elsa's passing. She also insisted that Andrew receive only a minimal share of her estate, ensuring the bulk went into a trust for her baby. James Redwood arched an eyebrow. "This is a significant shift from your existing arrangement," he noted. "Are you sure?" Elsa inhaled slowly, pressing a hand to her round belly. "Yes, I'm sure." The next morning, she woke up to an urgent text from Linda. "You need to see the news." Elsa turned on the TV, heart pounding. The local station aired a story about a leaked set of text messages and photos from Harwell Pharmaceuticals implicating Andrew Greenwood in an affair with a co-worker, Clarissa Henderson. Elsa's phone buzzed incessantly. Friends, co-workers, even distant relatives who suddenly remembered her number. Her gaze lingered on a photo of Andrew and Clarissa entwined on a hotel balcony. The anchor's solemn voice declared that the scandal might jeopardize an upcoming merger for Harwell. Their intimate business just got thrown into the public spotlight. Elsa's phone rang, Andrew calling from wherever he was. She let it ring, ignoring the frenzied pounding in her chest. If he needed her, he should have considered that before playing with fire. Andrew returned 3 days later, disheveled, desperate. He found Elsa in the nursery, quietly folding baby clothes into a small dresser. "Elsa," he said, voice raw, "we have to talk." She continued folding. "Is this about your media scandal or Clarissa Henderson's ultimatum?" He slumped against the doorframe, pinching the bridge of his nose. "She's threatening to sue Harwell for harassment if the company doesn't pay her a severance package. Her claims are exaggerated. She's painting me as if I coerced her into the relationship. My boss is furious. They might fire me if I can't contain the fallout." Elsa remained stoic, her heart racing. She felt strangely numb. "What does that have to do with me?" He looked at her, tears forming in his eyes. "Harwell's lawyers told me to resolve this quietly. They want me to settle with her out of court. They're prepared to pay a large sum, but they expect me to take care of Clarissa personally too. She's making demands." Elsa's spine stiffened. "Demands like picking our baby's name." Again. Andrew's eyes flicked downward. She's fixated on the idea. She's resentful that we're having a baby at all. It's twisted. But if I can't calm her down, I lose my job. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the baby's new nightlight. Elsa's mind whirred. She felt the baby move within her, a gentle reminder of innocence amid the chaos. "I have no words for how disgusting this is." "Andrew," she finally said, "you made this mess. You'd better find a way out that doesn't involve sacrificing our child to your mistress's whims." He hung his head, appearing older, wearier than Elsa had ever seen him. "I'm so sorry, Elle," he whispered. She looked at him, tears filling her own eyes. "You broke my heart. You involved our baby in your lies. I'm sorry too. Sorry I ever believed we could fix this." Days crept by, overshadowed by gossip, legal meetings, and Andrew's frantic attempts to salvage his career. Elsa's belly felt heavier each day, not just from the baby, but from the burden of stress and heartbreak. Determined to protect her child, Elsa pressed forward with revising her will. She followed James Redwood's instructions, meticulously reviewing each clause with unwavering resolve. She made sure her sister Maggie Johnson was the primary guardian, and that any inheritance Andrew might receive would be stringently limited, subject to oversight by a court-appointed trustee who would protect the baby's interests if anything happened to Elsa. On a brisk Tuesday afternoon, she signed the finalized will. As her pen lifted from the paper, a strange calm settled over her, as though she had finally reclaimed a piece of her autonomy. She had no intention of dying, of course, but ensuring that Clarissa's manipulations wouldn't touch her child felt like a victory. That evening, Andrew noticed a packet of legal documents on the kitchen counter. "What's this?" he asked quietly. Elsa snatched the papers, pressing them against her chest. "None of your concern," he frowned. "Is that your will? Are you cutting me out?" She glared at him. "You gave the mother of your child every reason to doubt you. I'm looking out for our baby Andrew. You should be grateful I'm even allowing you any share." Andrew's face crumpled with guilt. "Elle, please. I can't lose everything." Elsa closed her eyes, tears threatening to overflow. "You already lost me," she said gently. "The only thing left for you to do is prove you're worthy of being our baby's father. Life, it seems, has impeccable timing. Just as Andrew's scandal at work reached a fever pitch, Elsa went into early labor 4 weeks ahead of schedule. It was midnight when the contractions started. Pain rippled through her abdomen like rolling thunder. She fumbled for her phone, calling Linda, who rushed over to drive her to the hospital. The baby wasn't due for another month. Fear gripped Elsa. Andrew was at an emergency corporate meeting he had left that afternoon, promising to finalize the Clarissa settlement by the next day. Elsa tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She texted him, "In labor. Come to the hospital." She received no reply. At St. Mary's maternity wing, Linda helped Elsa to the reception desk, her face tense with worry. Within minutes, nurses wheeled Elsa into a birthing suite. Dr. Harriet Liu arrived shortly after, swapping her coat for scrubs. "We'll take good care of you," the doctor reassured Elsa. "Let's see how far along you are." The contractions came in waves, each one more punishing than the last. Fear, pain, and heartbreak mingled as Elsa struggled to breathe through her sobs. The nurse placed an IV in her arm, hooking her up to monitors that tracked the baby's heartbeat, a steady lub-dub, like a candle in a gale. Hours later, exhaustion enveloped Elsa. She drifted in and out of delirium. All she could think about was whether Andrew would show up. Would he hold her hand, or had their marriage become so fractured that he'd miss the birth of their child? Just when Elsa thought she couldn't endure another contraction, Andrew burst through the door. Drenched in sweat tie-askew, he looked terrified. "Elsa." "I'm here," he panted, rushing to her side. "I'm sorry it took so long." She locked eyes with him, a tear sliding down her cheek. She wanted to scream at him for being late, for letting their marriage go to pieces. But another contraction seized her, and she cried out. In that moment, none of their drama mattered as much as bringing this baby safely into the world. The last few minutes of labor were a blur of agony, shouts, and urgent commands from Dr. Liu. When it was finally over, a shrill, piercing cry filled the room. Elsa felt an overwhelming rush of relief, love, and protectiveness. The baby, a girl, emerged from the chaos, eyes squeezed shut, lungs announcing her arrival to the world. Andrew hovered nearby, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their daughter. The nurses placed the tiny infant on Elsa's chest. Elsa stared at her daughter in awe, counting 10 little fingers, 10 little toes. The baby's eyes blinked open for a moment, revealing murky blue newborn irises. "She's perfect," Elsa whispered, voice cracking with emotion. Andrew gently touched the baby's head. "She looks just like you." He breathed. Time seemed to stand still. For that fragile moment, Elsa forgot. Clarissa forgot the heartbreak and let the rush of motherhood wash over her. She loved this baby, more than she had ever loved anything in her life. But reality seeped back in quickly. A nurse asked, "Have you chosen a name for the birth certificate?" Elsa's eyes locked onto Andrew's, remembering the horrifying notion that his mistress had suggested the baby's name. Andrew cleared his throat. "Elsa, you choose," he said, voice trembling. "It's your call." Elsa paused, pressing her lips together. Part of her wanted to use a name Clarissa would detest out of spite. But she banished that petty impulse. She looked at her baby's face so innocent. The name needed to be one filled with hope, not revenge. In a tear-laced whisper, she said, "Clara. I want to name her Clara Grace Greenwood." Andrew nodded, tears still shining in his eyes. "Clara," he echoed. "That's beautiful." Elsa rested her forehead gently against her daughter's tiny head, silently thanking God that Clarissa Henderson had no say in this precious life. Over the next day, Elsa rested in the hospital, recovering from the delivery. The baby Clara rested in a bassinet by her bedside, occasionally fussing for a feeding or diaper change. Andrew stayed in a chair, drifting in and out of sleep, tormented by the guilt that had become his constant companion. On the second day, Linda brought flowers, balloons, and a teddy bear. She joked about how Clara had the entire hospital staff wrapped around her little finger. Then Linda's face turned somber. "Elle, you should see this," she whispered, handing her phone to Elsa. An article on a local gossip website displayed the headline, "Corporate Scandal Deepens Mistress Claims Naming Rights Over Top Executive's Child." Clarissa Henderson had given an exclusive interview airing dirty laundry about Andrew's affair. She alleged that Andrew had promised she could name the baby if she didn't speak to the press. Elsa's stomach churned. She bit her lip to hold back tears. Andrew read over her shoulder, his face contorting. God, she's twisted everything. This is blackmail." Just then, Elsa's phone dinged with an email notification. It was from Clarissa Henderson herself. A vile, mocking message. "I hope you enjoy your new motherhood. Don't forget who nearly named your precious baby. Andrew won't escape me that easily." Attached was a copy of the settlement they'd been negotiating. Clarissa had apparently decided to go scorched earth, revealing everything in a public spectacle. Elsa felt a wave of anger so strong it threatened to knock her back. Clara whimpered, and Elsa gently rocked her bassinet, forcing herself to stay calm. Andrew sat at the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Elle." She stared at him. "You gave her this power, Andrew. I hope you remember that every day." Released from the hospital, Elsa brought Clara home, cradling her protectively. While Andrew hauled the car seat and diaper bag, Elsa stepped into their house, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. The nursery looked as serene as ever, with soft pastel walls and plush animals lining the shelves. But the tension in the house was palpable. Andrew tried to busy himself making tea, tidying up. Elsa fed Clara, marveling at her tiny features. For a few days they lived in a kind of fragile truce. Andrew handled midnight feedings, rocked Clara to sleep, and tried to shield Elsa from further stress. He rarely spoke of the legal fiasco or Clarissa, but Elsa knew it was boiling beneath the surface. Late one night, Andrew's phone buzzed. He had left it on the kitchen counter. Elsa pacing the living room with a fussy. Clara couldn't help but glance at the screen. Another message from Clarissa. "We're not done. You owe me." Elsa's heart thudded against her ribs, revulsion curling in her stomach. How much longer would this woman torment them? Clara wailed, reminding Elsa that her child depended on her. She scooped the baby into her arms, kissing her soft forehead. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured. "Mummy's here." She had changed her will to protect Clara's future. Legally, at least she felt safer. But emotionally, the threat of Clarissa felt like a venom that refused to dissipate. One afternoon, as Elsa napped upstairs with Clara, Andrew snooped around the study, searching for financial documents that might help him finalize the settlement with Clarissa. He stumbled upon a folder labeled Estate Plan, updated half-hidden under a stack of magazines. Curiosity ignited, and he opened it. Inside he found a copy of Elsa's newly revised will. His eyes raked over the clauses, each one more devastating than the last. Primary guardian for Clara in the event of Elsa's death. Maggie Johnson. Financial trust for Clara. Andrew Greenwood, barred from accessing funds without explicit court approval. Distribution of Elsa's assets. Minimal spousal inheritance to Andrew, with conditions that effectively limited his control. His throat went dry. He had never felt more estranged from his wife, the woman he once adored. Frantic footsteps pounded upstairs. Elsa appeared, hair disheveled from sleep, Clara in her arms. She immediately saw the open folder. "Were you snooping?" she demanded, voice trembling with anger. Andrew clutched the file. "I just wanted to get the financial documents I need for Clarissa's settlement. I found this by accident." Elsa's cheeks flamed. "You had no right. I had every right." Andrew cut in, surprising them both with the hardness in his tone. "I'm your husband, the father of this child. Yet you plan to cut me out of our daughter's life if anything happens to you. Are you punishing me for my mistakes?" Her eyes sparked with fury. "My mistakes? You nearly gave our baby's name to your mistress. You gave that woman power in our marriage. And you're calling me unfair?" Clara began to cry, unsettled by the raised voices. Elsa rocked her gently, tears gathering in her own eyes. Andrew exhaled shakily. I can't lose you both. I know I messed up, but please give me a chance to make it right." She blinked away tears, exhaustion etched into her features. "I've given you every chance already. The next steps are yours to figure out." Andrew's job hung in the balance. Clarissa's demands growing more unreasonable by the day. When Harwell Pharmaceuticals threatened to terminate Andrew unless he resolved the scandal, he felt his world crumbling. One crisp morning, he suited up and left for a meeting with Clarissa at Redwood & Associates' neutral ground, with both of their lawyers present. Elsa stayed home with Clara, her anxiety spiking. She remembered how Andrew had insisted he was going to fix everything. But could she trust him? Hours later, Andrew trudged through the front door looking pale as a ghost. Elsa rushed to him, heart pounding. "What happened?" He sank into a chair, loosening his tie. "It's done," Clarissa settled. "I'll keep my job, but there's a heavy financial blow. Our savings will take a hit." He paused, swallowing hard. She demanded an apology in writing. She demanded that I publicly acknowledge our relationship as consensual so she couldn't be accused of blackmail. Elsa frowned. You signed that. Andrew shrugged, eyes hollow. My hands were tied. It was sign or lose everything. We can move on now, though. Elsa's gaze flicked to Clara, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. Moving on won't be easy. He nodded regret, thick in his expression. I'd do anything to erase what I did. She looked at him for a long moment, uncertain how to respond. The hush in the house felt deafening, broken only by Clara's soft breathing. Perhaps the final chapter of Clarissa's interference had just been written, but the damage left behind was immeasurable. In the weeks that followed, Andrew poured his energies into fatherhood. He woke for late-night feedings, changed diapers, and rocked Clara while softly singing lullabies. Elsa watched his transformation with cautious hope. He even agreed to couples therapy despite his initial reluctance. Their counselor, Dr. Beatrice Holmes, ran a tight ship. During sessions, she delved into the depths of their emotional scars. Elsa recounted how betrayed she felt when Andrew allowed Clarissa to choose the baby's name. Andrew broke down, admitting his weakness and fear of losing the mistress's silence. Dr. Holmes posed tough questions about intimacy, trust, and the future. Many sessions ended in tears, yet slowly cracks of light began to appear through the darkness. Andrew recognized that his fling had been less about love and more about ego and boredom. Elsa grappled with the realization that she had put Andrew on a pedestal, ignoring the faults that grew like cracks in a dam. Sometimes, after therapy, Andrew cooked dinner while Elsa rested. They managed small conversations without erupting into shouting matches. The will remained a sensitive topic, but Elsa held her ground. Andrew never asked her to change it. Perhaps he realized she had good reason to protect Clara's interests. One evening, Andrew tentatively approached Elsa in the nursery. She was nursing Clara, who was nearly 3 months old now, with soft brown hair that curled at the ends. She's beautiful, he said, voice thick with emotion. Elsa nodded, pressing her lips to Clara's forehead. Yes, she is. Andrew lingered, picking at the thread of his shirt. I'm not sure how to say this, but thank you for naming her Clara. I know you could have done something spiteful, but you didn't. You chose a lovely name. A wistful smile touched Elsa's lips. She's innocent. She deserves a name born of love. He inhaled slowly. I know it might be too late for me, but I love you, Elsa. I want us to be a real family. She sighed, tears glistening. I'm not sure if it's too late, Andrew. I'm too tired to know. But I do know we have a child together, and we'll do our best by her, no matter what happens between us. Time marched on with the unstoppable force of daily life. Clara turned 6 months, then 9. Each milestone, her first laugh, her first attempt at crawling, brought Elsa and Andrew together in fleeting moments of shared wonder. Their therapy continued, though progress was slow. Trust once broken never returns in an instant. But Andrew was determined to prove himself. He closed off all contact with Clarissa, refused any new travel unless absolutely necessary, and even took a step back at work to focus on family. He also paid back the settlement money from his bonus, ensuring that they weren't strapped for household finances. During Clara's first birthday, a small party in their backyard, Elsa spotted Andrew in the midst of children's laughter balloons and a little sash cake for Clara. He wore a carefree smile she hadn't seen in ages. That night, after everyone left, he and Elsa cleaned up together. By the time the yard was tidy, The sun had set, and Clara was fast asleep. Elsa turned to Andrew. "You've been different." "In a good way," she said softly. He blinked, hope stirring in his eyes. "I'm trying, because you and Clara are worth every effort." She weighed her words carefully. "I haven't changed my will back. I need you to understand. It's not about revenge. It's about security." He placed a hand over hers, warmth radiating from his touch. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I'll keep working until you trust me enough to change it, if you ever do." She looked at him, finally allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. "That might take a long time," she whispered. Andrew nodded, tears brimming. "I'll wait." Months after Clarissa's settlement, the Greenwood household had found a shaky new normal. Andrew took on more fatherly duties. Elsa maintained part-time work from home, balancing projects with caring for Clara. Life felt stable. Then one chilly autumn morning, an envelope arrived, no return address. Elsa opened it cautiously. Andrew and Elsa. "You might believe your life is perfect now, but secrets have a way of re-emerging. Andrew. You owe me more than a settlement. Don't get too comfortable." See. Elsa's blood ran cold. She handed the note to Andrew. His face whitened. "What is she trying to do?" "We have a legal settlement. She can't come after me again." Elsa pressed her lips together. "She can still torment us psychologically, apparently." They reached out to James Redwood for advice. He assured them that legally Clarissa had no grounds to demand anything further. Yet the letter's threat loomed over them like a dark cloud. Would Clarissa continue to haunt their marriage? Or was this her final hiss before disappearing for good? That night, as Clara slept soundly, Elsa found Andrew sitting in the living room staring blankly at the TV. She sank onto the couch beside him. "We can't live in fear," she murmured. He exhaled slowly. "I'll never forgive myself if she hurts you or Clara. But I think this is just another attempt at manipulation. She has no real hold over us now." Elsa nodded, leaning her head against Andrew's shoulder for the first time in what felt like forever. They sat like that for a long time, silent, but not alone. While Clarissa's letter rattled them, it also acted as a catalyst. Andrew and Elsa talked more openly than ever about how they ended up in such a mess, how isolation and unspoken resentments became the breeding ground for infidelity. Therapy sessions with Dr. Holmes grew more intense, yet also more fruitful. Elsa, meanwhile, blossomed in her role as a mother. Clara turned into a bright, giggling toddler with an inquisitive mind. Every time Elsa heard her daughter's laughter, she felt a surge of gratitude for the choice she made at the hospital to name her child. From the heart, not from vengeance or outside interference. Bit by bit, Elsa found herself acknowledging Andrew's sincere effort. She noticed how he never flinched when she brought up the subject of the affair, or how he no longer shielded his phone. For a while she tested him unintentionally, glancing at his screen or phone logs. He never protested, never hid anything. Trust began to germinate in the fertile ground of honesty. One evening after Clara was in bed, Andrew emerged from the study with a small envelope, cheeks flushed with nerves. He handed it to Elsa. Inside was a note describing his intentions to place additional funds into Clara's trust unasked. He wrote, "I can't erase the past, but I can invest in our future. This is my way of showing you I'm serious about being a father you and Clara can rely on. Andrew." Tears welled in Elsa's eyes. She saw genuine remorse, an active attempt to heal what had once been hopelessly shattered. By the time Clara turned 2, the Greenwood home had grown quieter, more stable. The constant dread that once lingered like soak in the walls had thinned. Arguments were rare, replaced by careful conversations and small gestures of healing. Elsa no longer walked on eggshells, and Andrew no longer seemed like a man hiding in plain sight. It was Elsa who suggested they visit James Redwood's office again. This time she didn't come alone or in secret. Andrew walked beside her, holding Clara's hand, as they entered the same firm where Elsa had once rewritten her will out of fury and heartbreak. But today wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, protection, and yes, maybe a small step toward rebuilding something that resembled a partnership. James Redwood greeted them with a warm smile and firm handshake. "Back again, Mrs. Greenwood," he said, nodding. "Or should I say, Mr. and Mrs. Greenwood?" Elsa smiled faintly. "We're still writing our ending," she replied. They sat in the familiar glass-walled office sunlight, pouring in over the leather-bound law books and dark oak furniture. Clara played on the carpet with a small stuffed giraffe, oblivious to the heavy conversation unfolding above her. James reviewed the proposed amendments to Elsa's will. In the new version, Andrew would no longer be entirely excluded. In the event of Elsa's untimely death, Andrew would share partial guardianship of Clara, but Maggie Johnson, Elsa's steadfast sister, would still hold primary oversight. The trust fund remained ironclad, impenetrable to anyone's ambition or mistake. Clara's future was untouchable. When the final signatures were made, James carefully slid the documents into a fireproof cabinet. Andrew turned to Elsa, his eyes softer than she'd seen in years. "Thank you," he said, voice low, "not just for changing the will, but for letting me show you I can be better." Elsa stared at him for a long moment, before glancing toward the corner of the office where a potted fern basked in the sunlight. It was the same plant she'd noticed 2 years ago, quietly thriving in its modest ceramic pot. It hadn't withered. It hadn't demanded attention. It had simply endured, growing leaf by leaf. "We're not perfect," Elsa said softly, "but maybe we don't need to be. Maybe what we need is just the will to keep growing." Andrew reached for her hand. She let him hold it this time, her grip tentative but real. The scar of betrayal would never fully vanish. It would always be part of their story. But with each day of effort, with each coup from Clara, each sunrise shared over quiet coffee, Elsa felt something unexpected. Not just forgiveness, but renewal. They left the office not as the couple who had once dreamed under a willow tree, nor as the fractured pair who had battled over trust and betrayal. They left as 2 people who chose again and again to show up for their daughter, and maybe in time for each other. The rain tapped gently against the living room windows, a soft rhythm that seemed to echo the stillness inside. Clara, now a bubbly toddler with a halo of unruly brown curls, toddled through the house with a photo album clutched in her tiny hands. She'd recently discovered her baby pictures and squealed with delight every time she saw her own face, wide-eyed, gummy-smiled, wrapped in pastel blankets. Elsa lounged on the couch, sipping tea, as Clara climbed into her lap, still flipping pages. Andrew joined them a moment later, with a bowl of apple slices, setting it down, before settling on the other side of the couch. It had been over 3 years since the worst storm of their lives, and the Greenwood household, once fractured by betrayal, had begun to resemble something almost sacred. It wasn't perfect. The shadows of the past lingered, but so did the light of forgiveness. I was thinking. Elsa began, watching Clara point to a picture of her newborn self with a gurgling giggle. Maybe we could do a new family portrait. A real one this time. Andrew looked up, surprised. You mean all three of us? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. The portraits we took before Clara was born. They feel like someone else's memories now. We've lived through too much. It's time we captured who we are now, not who we were pretending to be. Andrew swallowed hard. I'd like that, he said, reaching over to brush a curl from Clara's forehead. We're not the same people. Maybe that's a good thing. Elsa looked at him, this man who had once broken her in ways she never thought she'd recover from, and yet here he was. He had stayed, not just physically but emotionally. He had rebuilt himself into someone more aware, more humble, more father than he'd ever been, husband. And she had changed too. Gone was the woman who had lived quietly in someone else's shadow, trusting blindly. In her place stood a mother with a steel backbone who had rewritten her will not out of bitterness, but out of love for her child, who had dared to hope again, not for fairy tales, but for quiet, hard-earned joy. That evening, as the rain turned to a fine mist, Elsa stepped outside with Clara wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at the sky, grey but peaceful. Life wasn't about avoiding storms. It was about learning how to dance in the drizzle and find warmth after the cold. Andrew came out moments later and wrapped his arm around them. Clara, sleepy now, nestled her head into Elsa's shoulder. Whatever happens next, Elsa murmured, we choose it together. Andrew nodded. Together. There would always be whispers from the past. But the future, that was still unwritten. And for the first time, in a long time, Elsa was ready to pick up the pen again. Betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption. Elsa Greenwood's journey was a tumultuous testament to the power of resilience. When Andrew's affair threatened to tear their marriage apart, Elsa's fury drove her to rewrite her will, cutting him off from the life they once built together. Yet the birth of their daughter Clara planted new seeds of hope. Through therapy, forgiveness, and unwavering commitment to their child's well-being, they discovered that some relationships, though scarred, can still heal. Today, Elsa and Andrew navigate life one small step at a time, cherishing the miracle they created together. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, love can endure if we choose to nurture it. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of betrayal, intrigue, and ultimate redemption, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating real-life stories. Your support helps us bring you more deep dives into the hidden corners of human emotion and resilience. Thank you for watching. What happens when a man blinded by his own success decides his wife is no longer good enough? Thomas Vance was the king of his world, the celebrated CEO of a tech empire he built from scratch. His wife Amelia was his quiet shadow, the woman who had stood by him since the beginning. But in his eyes, she was a relic of a past he wanted to erase. So he did the unthinkable at the most prestigious tech gala of the year, in front of friends, rivals, and the media. He publicly cast her aside for a younger, flashier model. He thought he was closing a chapter. He had no idea he was about to lose the entire book, because the quiet, unassuming family he had just discarded held a secret that would bring his kingdom crashing down around him. Thomas Vance lived a life plated in chrome and glass. His penthouse apartment overlooked the sprawling, glittering expanse of downtown Seattle a city he felt he had conquered. Below, in a sleek high-rise that bore his company's logo, Innovate Dynamics, hundreds of employees worked to manifest his vision. He was 38 with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen and an ego polished to a blinding sheen. He had clawed his way up from a middle-class background, fueled by ramen noodles, sleepless nights, and a ferocious ambition that left little room for sentimentality. His wife, Amelia Hayes, was the living embodiment of that sentimentality. They had met in college back when his company was just a mess of wires and code in a damp garage, and his diet consisted of whatever was on sale at the corner store. She was an art history major, with a quiet smile and eyes that saw the brilliant, driven man beneath the threadbare sweater. She had believed in him, supported him, and even used her modest inheritance, a few $1,000s from her grandmother, to buy him his first server bank. For 15 years, she had been his anchor. She managed their home with an effortless grace, remembered the birthdays of his key employees, and could soothe his temper with a soft touch and a knowing look. She was the calm in his storm, the bedrock beneath his towering ambition. But anchors, Thomas had recently decided, were for holding you in place, and he wanted to fly higher. The cracks had started small, a dismissive wave of his hand when she'd mention her volunteer work at the local library, a cutting remark about the simple, elegant dress she chose for a black tie event. Amelia, he'd sighed, adjusting his own custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. This isn't a faculty dinner. You look sweet. I need you to look powerful. Amelia had simply smiled, a flicker of hurt in her eyes that he chose to ignore. I'm not a power accessory, Thomas. I'm your wife. His new friends, a slick cohort of venture capitalists and socialites, didn't understand Amelia. They saw a plain, quiet woman who preferred a good book to a noisy nightclub. They saw her as a mismatch for the dynamic, ruthless Thomas Vance they admired. And their whispers, quiet at first, began to echo Thomas's own internal monologue. The catalyst for his final cruel decision was Isabel Croft. Isabel was everything Amelia was not. She was a fiery, ambitious public relations specialist with a network of contacts as vast as her wardrobe. Her laughter was loud, her opinions were sharp, and her presence at his side made him feel like the man he believed he had become, invincible, modern, and utterly unencumbered by the past. He began seeing Isabel discreetly, then less so. He convinced himself it wasn't just an affair. It was an upgrade. It was a strategic business move for his personal brand. Amelia was a comfortable, well-worn sweater. Isabel was a suit of armor. The final conversation with Amelia was chilling in its brevity. He found her in the sunroom, tending to an orchid he'd forgotten he'd given her years ago. We need to talk, he said, his tone devoid of warmth. She didn't turn around, just continued to mist the plant's leaves. I know, Thomas. It's not working anymore, Amelia. We've grown apart. I've grown. And you haven't. The cruelty of the words hung in the air between them. I want a divorce. She finally turned her face pale, but her expression composed. There were no tears, only a profound, weary sadness. I see. After all this time, all we built. I built it, he corrected her instantly. I built all of this. You were just here. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. At that moment, Amelia Hayes looked at the man she had loved, the boy she had supported, and saw only a stranger. A king in a chrome palace, admiring his own reflection, oblivious to the fact that the foundations were made of sand. You'll get a generous settlement, of course, he continued, mistaking her silence for acquiescence. You'll be comfortable. I just need you to be gone. Quietly. Amelia straightened up the watering can still in her hand. A flicker of something steely, something he'd never seen before, entered her eyes. "Quietly." She repeated the word, a soft, dangerous whisper. "I don't think you get to decide how I handle my humiliation, Thomas. But don't worry. I'll be gone." He felt a brief, unfamiliar prickle of unease, but dismissed it as he walked away. He was Thomas Vance. He was in control. What could she possibly do? She was just Amelia, the librarian's daughter, from a quiet, boring family in Oregon. He had already forgotten the name of her brother, a quiet, bookish type he'd met once or twice at holidays. Evan Eric. It didn't matter. None of them mattered anymore. He was ascending, and it was time to cut away the dead weight. The Innovate Forward Gala was the jewel in Thomas's corporate crown. Held annually at the Chihuly Garden and Glass Museum. It was a spectacular fusion of art and technology, a testament to his company's success and his own personal brand. This year was to be the biggest yet. They were on the cusp of launching Nexus, a revolutionary AI integration platform that promised to make Innovate Dynamics a titan on the level of Google or Microsoft. The entire tech world was watching. For Thomas, it was the perfect stage. He wanted to rip the Band-Aid off, to make a statement so bold and unequivocal that there would be no messy aftermath, no lingering whispers. He would excise Amelia from his life in a single surgical cut and present his future Isabel to the world. It was brutal, but in his mind it was efficient. Amelia received the formal invitation, a thick card of embossed black linen 2 weeks after their conversation. A small handwritten note from Thomas's personal assistant was tucked inside. "Mr. Vance requests your attendance. He feels it is important for a final public show of unity." It was a summons, not an invitation, a final command to the woman he was discarding. She stared at it for a long time, then a slow, resolute calm settled over her. She would go. But she would not go as a victim. On the night of the gala, Thomas was electric. He stood near the entrance, a glass of champagne in hand, with Isabel Croft clinging to his arm. She was a vision in a glittering, backless silver gown, her laughter echoing off the vibrant glass sculptures. Thomas soaked in the admiration, the flash of cameras, the deferential greetings from industry rivals. This was his world. This was where he belonged. Then Amelia arrived. A hush fell over the immediate area, a ripple of confusion spreading through the crowd. She wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. Thomas had expected her to slip in quietly, find a corner table, and perform her role as the soon-to-be ex-wife with quiet dignity. But Amelia made an entrance. She wore a simple, sleeveless gown of the deepest sapphire blue. It wasn't flashy or revealing, but the fabric flowed around her like liquid midnight, and the color made her calm, intelligent eyes burn with an inner fire. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing a graceful neck, adorned with a single stunning diamond pendant, a piece Thomas had never seen before. She didn't look broken or defeated. She looked serene, poised, and utterly, unshakably composed. She walked in alone, her head held high, and the whispers that followed her were not of pity but of intrigue. Thomas felt a surge of irrational anger. This was his night. She was ruining the script. He strode towards her. Isabel, a step behind her, smile tightening. "Amelia," he said, his voice a low growl. "What is this?" "That's quite an entrance." "You asked me to come," she replied, her voice even. "I came." She glanced at Isabel, her gaze not hostile, but coolly appraising. "Isabel, you look well." Before Isabel could muster a reply, Thomas took control. He stepped onto the small stage near the center of the main hall, tapping a microphone to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent. This was it. The moment he had planned. "Friends, colleagues, partners," he began, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the future of Innovate Dynamics. A future of bold moves, of shedding the old to embrace the new." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He looked directly at Amelia, who stood motionless in the crowd, her expression unreadable. "In business as in life, we must sometimes make difficult, unsentimental decisions to ensure continued growth. We must be willing to divest from assets that no longer serve our forward momentum." His eyes were cold, turning his wife into a line item on a balance sheet. "And so on this night of new beginnings, I want to be transparent with you all. Amelia and I are ending our marriage." A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to divorce. It was another to announce it like a corporate restructuring at your own company gala. It was monstrous. Thomas pressed on the power of the moment intoxicating him. "I wish her well, of course. But my future and the future of Innovate Dynamics requires a different kind of partnership." He reached down and pulled a stunned but thrilled Isabel onto the stage with him. "A partnership that looks forward, not back." He raised his glass. "To the future." The silence was deafening. No one clapped. The attendees, CEOs, investors, journalists, stared, their expressions a mixture of shock, disgust, and morbid fascination. They were witnessing a public execution. Thomas's smile faltered for a second. He hadn't expected this stunned silence. He had expected applause for his boldness. Then from the center of the crowd, a single person began to clap. Slowly, deliberately. It was Amelia. She clapped not with anger or sarcasm, but with a strange, detached finality. Her eyes locked on his, and for the first time that night, he saw a flicker of something that looked like pity. She clapped 3 times, the sound echoing in the mortified silence. Then she turned her sapphire dress, swirling around her, and walked out of the gala, out of the museum, and out of his life. As the doors closed behind her, the spell broke. The room erupted in a furious buzz of whispers. Thomas stood on the stage. Isabel's hand in his, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. He felt powerful, liberated, and utterly in control. He had done it. He had publicly severed the tie to his past. He was free. He was so high on his own perceived victory that he failed to notice the man in the corner watching the entire exchange on his phone. A man who then put the phone to his ear and spoke 2 quiet words. "It's done." The week following the gala was for Thomas a victory lap. He and Isabel were the talk of the town. The gossip columns were ablaze, some condemning his cruelty, but others the ones he cared about, painting him as a decisive alpha visionary, unafraid to make the tough choices. He and Isabel were photographed at exclusive restaurants, their laughter loud and carefree. He had successfully rebranded his life. Amelia, true to her word, was gone. She didn't return to the penthouse. Her lawyer, a man whose name Thomas didn't recognize from any of the city's top firms, sent a curt email stating that Ms. Hayes would be handling all affairs through counsel and had no desire for personal contact. The divorce proceedings were initiated with unnerving speed and efficiency. Thomas instructed his own high-powered legal team to be generous, a final act of performative magnanimity. "Give her whatever she wants," he'd said. "It's a small price to pay for freedom." But while his personal life felt streamlined and upgraded, strange currents were beginning to stir at Innovate Dynamics. The launch of Nexus, which should have been his crowning achievement, was hitting unexpected turbulence. A key chip supplier suddenly invoked a force majeure clause and tripled their prices, citing unforeseen supply chain issues. A rival tech firm, one Hitinsum he had always considered second-rate, launched a surprisingly similar product a week early, undercutting his market entry. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was an irritating and costly setback. Then came the financial whispers. Thomas had been seeking a final round of capital investment to fund the global rollout of Nexus, a sum in the neighborhood of $500 million. It should have been easy. His company was a unicorn, a golden child of the tech world. Yet two major venture capital firms that had been courting him for months suddenly grew cold. Their top partners were suddenly unavailable for meetings. His CFO, a perpetually nervous man named Robert Smith, came into his office, his face ashen. "There's a problem, Thomas," Robert said, clutching a tablet. "A significant block of our publicly traded shares is being bought up, quietly, through multiple shell corporations." Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, unconcerned. "Corporate raiders smelling blood? Let them try. Our fundamentals are strong. It's just market jitters over the Nexus launch." "I don't think so." Robert pressed his finger, tracing a complex web of transactions on the screen. "This is different. It's methodical, precise, and incredibly well-funded. They're not just buying, they're strategically acquiring influence, and I've traced the primary purchasing vehicle back to an investment firm I've never heard of, North Star Holdings." Thomas scoffed. "North Star sounds like a backwater mutual fund. Find out who they are and buy them off." But North Star Holdings was a ghost. They had no public-facing partners, no flashy website, no media presence. They were a black hole of capital, their origins, shrouded in impenetrable layers of private equity law. Over the next 2 weeks, North Star's acquisitions accelerated. They weren't just buying shares. They were buying his company's debt from lenders and poaching key engineers with offers so ludicrously high that even Thomas couldn't match them. Panic and emotion. Thomas Vance hadn't felt since his garage days began to creep in. He was losing control. It felt like his company, his magnificent chrome and glass ship, was being boarded by pirates who were silent, invisible, and everywhere at once. Meanwhile, Amelia was rebuilding her life far from the glare of Seattle. She had retreated to her family's home in a quiet, wealthy enclave near Portland, Oregon. It wasn't a palace, but a sprawling, elegant craftsman-style house set on acres of old-growth forest overlooking the Willamette River. The Hayes family valued privacy above all else. They were to the outside world simply a comfortably retired couple. Her father, a former literature professor, and her mother, a landscape architect. But that was a carefully constructed facade. Amelia's father, William Hayes, hadn't just taught literature. He had used the proceeds from his grandfather's timber empire to become one of the most astute and discreet private investors on the West Coast. He didn't chase trends, he built legacies. He owned vast tracts of land, held controlling interests in quiet, unglamorous, but massively profitable industries, and ran his family's wealth with the quiet precision of a chess grandmaster. He despised the new money arrogance of men like Thomas Vance. The night of the gala, Amelia had called her brother, Ethan, from the car. "He did it," she'd said, her voice shaking but not breaking. "I saw." Ethan's voice was calm but with a hard, cold edge. "The plan is in motion. Dad has given the green light. North Star is a go." Ethan Hayes was the one Thomas had dismissed as Evan or Eric, the quiet, bookish one. Thomas would have been shocked to learn that Ethan, who had a PhD in computational economics from MIT, was the architect and manager of the Hayes family's vast investment portfolio. He was a prodigy who preferred the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly balanced algorithm to the roar of a boardroom. But his sister's public humiliation had ignited a cold fury within him. For the past year, at Amelia's pained but hesitant request to keep an eye on Thomas's finances, Ethan had been analyzing Innovate Dynamics. He saw what Thomas's ego blinded him to. The company was over-leveraged, dangerously dependent on the singular success of Nexus, and vulnerable to a hostile takeover. Thomas had built a beautiful skyscraper, but Ethan had discovered it was sitting on a fault line. And now, with the full, silent weight of the Hayes family fortune behind him, Ethan was triggering the earthquake. He was the ghost in the machine, the architect of Thomas's unraveling. And Thomas, consumed by his new life with Isabel and his own hubris, had no idea that the quiet, boring family he had cast aside was now holding the strings of his entire empire. He was fighting a war, and didn't even know his enemy's name. The email arrived on a Monday morning. It was from the board of directors, a group Thomas had personally selected and until now completely controlled. The subject line was stark: urgent and mandatory, emergency board meeting. Thomas read the body of the message, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. The meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. the next day. The agenda to discuss the recent significant shift in controlling interest of Innovate Dynamics and to vote on the future leadership of the company. Future leadership. The words felt like a slap in the face. He immediately called Marcus Thorne, his lead board member, and a man he'd considered a friend. "Marcus, what the hell is this? Who is North Star Holdings?" Marcus's voice was strained, distant. "Thomas, they have us. They've acquired over 51% of the voting shares. They did it so quietly, so fast. It's a masterclass in corporate raiding. They have a controlling interest. They called the meeting. My hands are tied." "Whose side are you on?" Thomas roared. "I'm on the side of the shareholders, Thomas, and right now North Star Holdings is the shareholder. I'm sorry. Just come to the meeting tomorrow." The line went dead. Thomas spent the rest of the day in a frantic, desperate haze. He called his lawyers, his brokers, his bankers. The answer was the same everywhere he turned. It was over. He had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. North Star Holdings had executed a flawless, bloodless coup. He was the king of a country that had already sworn allegiance to a new, unknown ruler. Isabel, sensing the shift in his fortunes, became distant. The carefree laughter was replaced by worried questions about their finances. "This will all blow over, right, Jay?" she asked, her eyes searching for an assurance he could no longer give. "Our trip to Monaco is still on for next month." He saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes and realized with a sickening lurch that she was just another asset, and her value was depreciating along with his stock price. That night he didn't sleep. He paced the floor of his penthouse, the glittering city lights below, now seeming to mock him. He played the events of the last few months over and over in his mind. The chip supplier, the rival's launch, the cold shoulders from the VCs. It hadn't been random bad luck. It had been a coordinated attack. Someone was trying to destroy him. But who? Who had this kind of money, this kind of sophistication, and this kind of hatred for him? He ran through his list of rivals. None of them had the resources or the subtlety for an operation of this scale. He arrived at the Innovate Dynamics headquarters the next morning, looking haggard, his bespoke suit feeling like a costume. The usual deference from his employees was gone, replaced by nervous glances and hushed whispers. He felt like a stranger in the empire he had built. The boardroom on the 50th floor was his sanctuary. It had a single massive table of polished obsidian and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. It was a throne room. But today, he was not the king. The board members were already seated, their faces grim. Marcus Thorne wouldn't meet his eye. At the head of the table, in the seat Thomas always occupied, sat a severe-looking man in his 60s, whom Thomas had never seen before. "Mr. Vance, thank you for joining us," the man said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "I am Alistair Finch, legal counsel for North Star Holdings. We can begin." The meeting was a formality, a brutal piece of corporate theatre. Finch laid out the situation in cold, legalistic terms. North Star Holdings now owned 51.7% of the company. In accordance with the company's bylaws, they were exercising their right to restructure leadership effective immediately. The board has been presented with a motion to remove Thomas Vance from his position as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board, Finch stated, looking around the table. All those in favor. Every single hand went up. Even Marcus Thorne's. A wave of dizziness and nausea washed over Thomas. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, it felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. "The motion carries," Finch said flatly. "Mr. Vance, your employment with Innovate Dynamics is terminated. Security will escort you from the building to collect your personal effects." Thomas stared speechless. His company, his life's work, was gone in the space of 5 minutes. His mind was a maelstrom of rage and confusion. "Who?" He finally managed to rasp, his voice hoarse. "Who is North Star? Who is behind this?" Alistair Finch allowed himself the slightest, cruelest hint of a smile. "North Star believes in a hands-on approach to its investments. They have already appointed a new CEO to guide Innovate Dynamics into its next chapter. He has an unparalleled understanding of the company's technology, its market position, and its vulnerabilities." Thomas's mind raced. Who could it be? A rival CEO he had poached talent from. A disgruntled former executive he had fired. "The new CEO is here," Finch said, gesturing towards the large double doors of the boardroom. "He is ready to take his seat." The doors swung open. Thomas Vance turned his head, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and furious anticipation. He was ready to face his destroyer. But the man who walked in was not a face he recognized from Forbes magazine or the Wall Street Journal. It was a face he had seen only a handful of times at awkward Thanksgiving dinners and one tedious wedding anniversary. A face he had dismissed as utterly insignificant. It was Amelia's brother, the quiet, bookish one, Ethan Hayes. Time seemed to slow down, to thicken like honey. The sounds of the boardroom, the shuffling of papers, the distant city traffic faded into a dull, roaring hum in Thomas's ears. He stared at the man walking towards the head of the table, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Ethan Hayes looked different from the handful of times Thomas had met him. Gone was the slightly awkward academic slouch and the ill-fitting blazer. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet generational wealth, not the flashy branding of new money. His movements were calm and deliberate. He carried an understated leather portfolio under his arm, and his eyes, the same intelligent, deep-set eyes as his sister's, held a look of cool, dispassionate assessment. He didn't look triumphant or vindictive. He looked like he was arriving for a job he was eminently qualified to do. He walked to the head of the table and placed his portfolio down. He gave a slight formal nod to Alistair Finch, and then looked around at the board members who straightened in their chairs, their attention absolute. Finally, his gaze fell on Thomas. "Thomas," he said, and the simple use of his first name was more devastating than any insult. It was the sound of a superior addressing a subordinate. "I'm sure this is a surprise." The connection hit Thomas like a physical blow, an explosion of understanding so violent it knocked the air from his lungs. North Star Holdings, the quiet, unassuming family from Oregon. Amelia's sudden, unnerving composure. The diamond pendant he had never seen before. The efficient, unknown lawyer. It all coalesced into a single, horrifying truth. He hadn't just divorced a simple librarian's daughter. He had publicly, cruelly, and arrogantly humiliated the beloved sister of an unimaginably wealthy and powerful family. He hadn't cut away dead weight. He had severed the artery that was keeping him alive, and they had simply waited for him to bleed out. He thought of Amelia's father, the folksy retired professor. He remembered shaking his hand, a soft academic grip, and feeling a smug sense of superiority. He had mistaken immense quiet power for weakness. He had looked at a lion and seen a house cat. "You," Thomas whispered the word, barely audible. His face had gone from red with rage to a ghostly white. "It was you." Ethan's expression didn't change. "My family does not appreciate public spectacles, especially when a member of our family is made the centerpiece." He gestured vaguely towards the panoramic window. "You built an impressive company, Thomas. Your technology is brilliant, but your foundation is rotten. You over-leveraged against future profits, you made enemies, and you surrounded yourself with sycophants. You valued perception over substance. That made you a target." He paused, letting the clinical assessment sink in. "My sister believed in you. She saw substance where it seems there was only ambition. When you cast her aside, you cast aside the only person who was genuinely invested in your success, not just your company's stock price. The loyalty you commanded was transactional. Ours is not." Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Thomas's world. He looked around the room at the board members, his friends. They were all looking at Ethan with a mixture of fear and respect. They had already shifted their allegiance. He was utterly, completely alone. The arrogance that had defined his entire adult life shattered into a million pieces. The charisma, the confidence, the sense of invincibility, it all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, terrified man. He saw his future in a sickening flash, the loss of his company, his wealth, his status, the departure of Isabel, the mockery of the very people he had sought to impress. The pity looks, the headlines, tech CEO ousted in hostile takeover. Thomas Vance loses it all. His heart began to pound against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The edges of his vision started to go dark. The air in the climate-controlled room felt thin, unbreathable. He tried to speak, to rage, to say something that would wound this calm, quiet man who had so effortlessly dismantled his entire existence. But no words came. Only a strangled gasp. He reached out a hand, grabbing the back of a chair to steady himself, but his legs gave way. A collective gasp went through the room as Thomas Vance, the titan of tech, the master of his universe, crumpled to the floor. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed in a heap on the plush corporate carpet, his meticulously crafted world finally and completely falling into darkness. The last thing he was aware of was the calm, controlled voice of Ethan Hayes saying, "Someone call security and get a medic. It seems Mr. Vance is unwell." Thomas awoke to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile antiseptic smell of a hospital. For a blissful, disoriented moment, He didn't know where he was or what had happened. Then memory returned, not as a flood, but as a series of brutal cinematic flashes. Ethan Hayes walking into the boardroom, the hands of the board members rising against him, the floor rushing up to meet him. A groan of pure agony escaped his lips. It wasn't just a headache. It was the pain of a soul that had been flayed. A nurse bustled in. "Ah, you're awake, Mr. Vance. You gave us all a scare. You had a severe panic attack leading to a vasovagal syncope. Basically, the shock made you faint. The doctor will be in to see you shortly." He was alone. There was no Isabel wringing her hands by his bedside, no concerned calls from his board members. His phone lying on the side table was dark and silent. He picked it up and saw why. A dozen missed calls and texts from his lawyer and his publicist, but nothing from anyone he had considered a friend. The top news alert on his screen was a headline from the Wall Street Journal: "Innovate Dynamics shakes up leadership founder. Thomas Vance ousted Ethan Hayes, appointed as new CEO." The article was clinical and devastating. It painted a picture of a seamless transition. It quoted board member Marcus Thorne, who praised Hayes as a visionary leader with a deep understanding of both technology and stable financial strategy. There was a single sentence about Thomas: "The board thanks Mr. Vance for his initial contributions and wishes him well in his future endeavors." It was a corporate obituary. He had been erased. When he was discharged the next day, the world he returned to was no longer his. His corporate accounts were frozen. His access to the Innovate Dynamics building was revoked. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Frank, who Thomas had shared a joke with just last week, looked at him with pity and told him his personal effects from his office would be couriered to him. Isabel was waiting for him at the penthouse, her bags already packed. There were no tears, no dramatic confrontation. Her departure was as transactional as their entire relationship had been. "I'm so sorry, Thomas, I really am," she said, avoiding his gaze. "But it's just too much. My brand is associated with success. I can't be tied to this kind of collapse." "So that's it?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Was it all just about the success?" She had the decency to look momentarily ashamed. "We had fun, didn't we? It was a great ride. But I have to look out for myself. You of all people should understand that." She kissed him on the cheek, a cold, dry gesture, and walked out of his life, leaving behind only the faint scent of her expensive perfume. In the weeks that followed, Thomas's downfall was absolute. He was forced to sell his penthouse to cover legal fees and the debts he had personally guaranteed. He moved into a small, generic rented apartment that felt like a prison cell. The friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Meanwhile, Ethan Hayes was transforming Innovate Dynamics. There were no grand pronouncements or flashy media appearances. He worked with a quiet, relentless efficiency. He renegotiated the company's debt from a position of strength. He smoothed over the supply chain issues with a few quiet phone calls. He scrapped Thomas's expensive vanity projects and refocused the company on its core technology. He earned the respect of the employees, not with charisma, but with competence. He was a builder, not a showman, and the company, freed from Thomas's ego-driven management, began to thrive in a way it never had before. He wasn't just a better CEO, he was a better leader. The most torturous part for Thomas was that Ethan's reign wasn't vindictive. He never spoke ill of Thomas in public. He never leaked damaging stories. His revenge wasn't loud and fiery. It was the quiet, complete success of the empire he had taken. It was the ultimate statement. You were the only thing holding this company back. Desperate, broken, and humbled in a way he never thought possible. Thomas did the one thing he had sworn he never would. He tried to contact Amelia. He sent her an email, a long, rambling, pathetic plea for, he wasn't even sure what. Forgiveness. An explanation. He poured out his regret, his shock, his loneliness. The reply came not from Amelia, but from her lawyer. It was one sentence long. Hayes has moved on and considers all matters between you to be concluded. We ask that you refrain from any further contact. The words were a final steel door slamming shut. She had moved on. The quiet, simple woman he had deemed unworthy of his future had a life that no longer included him even as a memory. The loud silence of her absence was the final damning verdict on the man he had been. He was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own making, haunted by the ghost of a good woman and the quiet, brilliant brother who had defended her honor by taking everything he had ever valued. 2 years passed. 2 years of grinding, humbling obscurity. Thomas Vance, the man who once graced the covers of tech magazines, was now a consultant for a small, struggling startup in a nondescript office park in the suburbs. The work was tedious. The pay was a fraction of what he once made in a day. But it was honest. The collapse had burned away his arrogance, leaving behind a scarred but more thoughtful man. He had lost everything, and in the process had been forced to find a part of himself he didn't know existed a person who could exist without applause. He learned to cook his own meals, to take the bus to find satisfaction in solving a small coding problem, instead of closing a multi-million-dollar deal. The silence he had once dreaded became a space for reflection. He finally understood the depth of his cruelty, the monumental folly of his pride. He realized he hadn't just lost a company. He had lost his moral compass long before that. The divorce gala wasn't the beginning of his fall. It was the symptom of a sickness that had been growing in him for years. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was walking through a public park when he saw her. Amelia. She was standing by a newly dedicated children's reading garden, a project funded by a local philanthropic foundation. She looked luminous. She wore a simple camel-colored coat, and her hair was shorter, framing a face that was more confident and serene than he had ever seen it. She was laughing, talking with a group of city officials. He saw her name on a bronze plaque, the Hayes Family Reading Garden, in honor of a lifelong love for books. He watched from a distance as she interacted with people. There was an ease, a warmth, a genuine grace to her that he had always taken for granted and had eventually mistaken for weakness. He saw it clearly now. Her strength had never been loud. It was quiet, deep, and resilient, like the roots of the old oak trees shading the garden. He saw a man approach her and hand her a coffee. It was Ethan. He looked relaxed out of the corporate world, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans. They stood side by side, a comfortable familial silence between them, watching children run through the garden their family had built. They weren't just wealthy. They were purposeful. They were using their power to create, to nurture, to give back. It was a different kind of wealth, one that couldn't be measured in stock prices or penthouse views. Thomas felt a profound, aching sense of loss, but it was no longer tangled with bitterness or a desire for revenge. It was a clean, sharp grief for the man he could have been, for the life he could have had if he hadn't been so blinded by shiny things. He knew with absolute certainty that even if he had all his money and power back, He could never earn his way back to the world she inhabited. He had a choice. He could walk over, try to speak to her, to offer a clumsy, inadequate apology. But he knew it would be a selfish act, one meant to soothe his own conscience, not hers. It would be a disruption of her peace, a peace she had clearly fought for, and won. And so for the first time in his life, Thomas Vance made a truly unselfish decision. He stayed hidden behind the trees. He watched his past for a few moments longer, a beautiful, untouchable tableau of a life he had thrown away. Then he turned and walked away. A solitary figure disappearing into the afternoon crowd, leaving Amelia Hayes to the bright, peaceful future she so richly deserved. He hadn't gotten his old life back, but in that moment of quiet retreat, he may have finally reclaimed a small piece of his soul. Thomas's new life was a quiet litany of routines. The 7:15 a.m. bus, the lukewarm coffee from the office machine, the 8 hours spent untangling buggy code for a company that made inventory management software. The work was unglamorous, but it was tangible. It was a world of problems and solutions, of clear syntax and logical flaws. It was, in its own way, a comfort. The ghosts of his past had receded, leaving not peace, but a quiet, manageable emptiness. He no longer craved the roar of the crowd, having learned the profound hollowness of its applause. It was during a late Tuesday night, while running a diagnostic on a client's network security, that he first saw the flicker. A digital ghost, a piece of malware so sophisticated, so elegant in its malevolence that it was almost beautiful. It wasn't designed to steal or ransom data. It was a sleeper agent designed to map a system's deepest architecture and wait. He traced its signature falling down a rabbit hole of encrypted servers and dark web forums. It was a digital breadcrumb trail, and at the end of it, he found a name that sent a chill down his spine: Axiom Global. Axiom was run by Damien Stryker, a man who made the old Thomas Vance look like a philanthropist. Stryker was a predator who didn't engage in takeovers. He preferred corporate evisceration. He would identify a competitor, shatter their core technology from the inside out, and then buy up the smoldering wreckage for pennies on the dollar. Thomas kept digging, his old obsessive instincts kicking in. He realized the malware he'd found was just a probe, a reconnaissance mission. But the digital fingerprint, the specific algorithmic structure, was a match for a security protocol he himself had designed years ago for Innovate Dynamics. It was an old back-end system access point for the Nexus platform, a vulnerability only its original architect would know how to exploit. Axiom wasn't just sniffing around. They were sharpening a spear aimed directly at the heart of his old company. They were planning to corrupt the Nexus platform from within, triggering a cascading failure that would not just damage Innovate Dynamics, but destroy its credibility forever. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. A bitter, ironic satisfaction bubbled up first. It would be justice, wouldn't it? For Ethan Hayes, the brilliant strategist, to be blindsided by a true shark like Stryker. For the company that had been stolen from him to be turned to ash. The old Thomas would have leaned back in his chair, poured a glass of whiskey, and watched the world burn. But the old Thomas was gone. All he felt now was a sickening dread. He thought of the thousands of employees, of the genuinely revolutionary technology they had all worked so hard to build. He had laid the foundation, and Ethan had built a stronger house upon it. The thought of a vulture like Stryker tearing it all down felt like a desecration. It was his legacy, even if his name was no longer on the door. His pride was no longer in the ownership, but in the creation itself. He was trapped. What could he do? If he went to the media, he'd be dismissed as a bitter, disgraced founder crying sour grapes. If he tried to contact Innovate Dynamics officially, he'd be blocked by lawyers and corporate firewalls. No one would believe him. He was a ghost, a non-entity. He spent the next 48 hours without sleep, fueled by caffeine and a cold, rising panic. He compiled everything. He had the malware signature, the traced path back to Axiom's known servers, a detailed schematic of the attack vector, and the specific vulnerability in the Nexus code. He had a warning that could save the company a message in a bottle and no one to give it to. He looked at the encrypted file on his screen, a Cassandra's prophecy that no one would hear, let alone believe. His past had finally caught up with him, not with a demand for vengeance, but with a test of his newfound soul. Thomas knew he couldn't approach the fortress of Innovate Dynamics through the front gate. So he went around the back. He remembered a young, fiercely intelligent cybersecurity engineer he had personally hired years ago, a woman named Maya Singh. She was brilliant, paranoid, and respected data above all else. He found her encrypted professional contact on a secure network and sent the data packet, no name, no explanation, just a subject line, Urgent Nexus Vulnerability. Check Legacy Protocol 7G. You are being hunted by Axiom. Inside Innovate Dynamics, the message was received like a bomb threat. It was immediately flagged and escalated. The initial consensus among the senior security staff was to dismiss it as a prank or an elaborate phishing attempt. But Maya Singh, now the head of the department, recognized the specificity of Legacy Protocol 7G. It was an obscure corner of the architecture. Thomas had built a piece of code so fundamental that no one had thought to revise it. She ran the diagnostic. Her face went pale. The anonymous source was right. A sophisticated infiltration was already in progress, silently mapping their systems for a full-scale assault. They were days, perhaps hours away from a complete catastrophe. Ethan Hayes was in a board meeting when Maya burst in a breach of protocol he had never witnessed. She laid out the situation in stark, terrifying detail. The attack was real, and the warning had come from an anonymous ghost who knew their systems as well as their founder. The realization dawned on Ethan slowly, then all at once. The intimacy of the knowledge, the strategic foresight. There was only one person on the planet with the ability and the motive, or perhaps the lack of motive, to send such a warning. It had to be Thomas. Pride warred with pragmatism in Ethan's mind. His every instinct was to handle it himself, to prove that his company didn't need its disgraced founder. But this enemy Axiom Global was a different beast. Ethan was a brilliant builder and strategist. But Thomas had been a street fighter. He knew how to think like a predator, because he had been one. Swallowing his pride, Ethan made the most difficult decision of his tenure as CEO. He picked up his phone and found a number he never thought he would dial. They met in a small, empty cafe, halfway between Thomas's shabby apartment and the glittering Innovate Tower. It was a neutral ground, a no-man's land between their two worlds. Thomas saw Ethan walk in, and for the first time, he saw the man not as a conqueror, but as a leader burdened by immense responsibility. The data you sent, Ethan began foregoing any greeting. It was accurate. We're vulnerable. Thank you. Thomas just nodded, stirring his black coffee. Stryker doesn't leave survivors. I didn't want to see him turn our work into a crater. Our work, Ethan repeated, acknowledging the shared ownership in that single phrase. Why Thomas after everything? Thomas looked out the window at the rain-streaked street. I spent 2 years thinking about everything I lost, he said, his voice quiet and raspy. My company, my money, my wife. But the thing I truly lost was the ability to be proud of the man I saw in the mirror. Helping you, helping the company, it wasn't about you. It was about me. It was the one thing I could do that the old me never would have. In that moment, Ethan saw the truth of it. This wasn't a ploy. It was an act of penance. Stryker will expect a conventional defense, Ethan said, his mind shifting into strategic mode. He'll anticipate us patching the vulnerability. We need to do more. We need to set a trap. A honeypot, Thomas said, his eyes lighting up with the old familiar fire of strategic battle. Feed his malware corrupted data. Make him think he's succeeding while we wall off the core systems and trace his attack back to the source. We can gut him, expose him to the SEC. For the next hour, they weren't victorious and vanquished. They were two brilliant minds united against a common enemy. Thomas's intimate, almost instinctual knowledge of the system's weaknesses, combined with Ethan's cool, methodical logic, formed a strategy that was both elegant and lethal. They saved Innovate Dynamics. The counterattack was a masterpiece. Axiom Global was exposed. Their stock plummeted, and Damian Stryker found himself under federal investigation. Ethan never publicly acknowledged Thomas's role, but the whispers in the tech world were deafening. A week later, a courier delivered a simple envelope to Thomas's apartment. Inside was a cashier's check for a substantial amount, with a simple unsigned note, consulting fee. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't an invitation back into their world. It was a respectful acknowledgement of a debt paid. It was enough. Thomas didn't see Amelia again, but one day he received a letter from her lawyer. It was a formal notice that the charitable foundation established by the Hayes family was endowing a new wing of the public library, the very one where Amelia used to volunteer. The wing was to be named the Vance Center for Digital Literacy, funded by an anonymous donation made in his honor. It was her final word, a quiet, graceful acknowledgement that she now remembered not the monster he had become, but the brilliant, driven man she had first loved. Thomas stood in his small apartment, holding the letter, and for the first time in a long time he felt no anger, no regret, only a profound, quiet sense of peace. He hadn't won his kingdom back, but he had at last found his honor. Thomas Vance's story is a stark reminder that the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. He measured his life in stock prices and public acclaim, and in doing so he tragically misjudged the true value of the people around him. He saw his wife's quiet strength as a weakness, and her family's humility as insignificance, a mistake that cost him everything. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a reckoning, a story of how karma wielded by a quiet, brilliant brother can be both swift and devastatingly precise. It reminds us that true power isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's the silent, deep-rooted strength that you never see coming. If this story of poetic justice and painful lessons resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story of consequence and redemption. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas that explore the complexities of human nature. What do you think Thomas deserved in the end? Did he get what was coming to him, or was his downfall too severe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.